listening to the HumanCare podcast, part of the Invisible, Not Broken network. I'm your host, Eva Minkoff. On this show, I have candid conversations about chronic illness with both patients and practitioners. In other words, humans like you and me. I'm also the founder of Wellacopia, the matching site for healthcare relationships. Visit wellacopia.com to connect with your ideal medical or wellness practitioners. Today's episode is part 3 of my conversation with Sneha Dave, the young adult that cannot be stopped. She is determined to change the world for the better, all while taking on ulcerative colitis and more. If you haven't yet listened to parts 1 and 2 of our conversation, I suggest going back and checking those out. As for one last mentioning of her list of accomplishments, in her spare time, Sneha is an avid wilderness advocate and enjoys mountain climbing. She most recently climbed, wait for it, Mount Kilimanjaro, the highest mountain in Africa, also known as the highest single freestanding mountain in the world. In part 3 of our awesome conversation, we discussed healthcare communication and literacy, her love for hiking, the outdoors, and athleticism, despite chronic illness, and striving to balance keeping track of health while there are so many opportunities as a young adult. Before we get started, a reminder that all conversations and health claims on this podcast are based on individual experiences and expertise. Everyone has their own personal and professional truths and should be treated as such. Okay, guys, let's get started. When it comes to communication, actually, let's say on an individual basis between whether it could be a healthcare provider or just someone working in healthcare and a patient, what does successful communication look like to you?
Mm-hmm. So, I think successful communication looks like open-ended questions, and questions that aren't targeted necessarily specifically toward the physical symptoms. So, understanding the environment as it pertains to physical symptoms. So, for example, if someone's in college and they have a lot of stress, well, that's probably going to exaggerate a lot of symptoms. So, how do we focus on removing the stress, whether that be extra time on exams or extra accommodations? So, there's a lot of things that aren't necessarily addressed that could be not easy fixes, but certainly fixes that could alleviate some of the symptoms, if that makes sense. So, I mean, at least for me in college, I think that there were some things that my physician did that made my college experience a little bit better, such as allowing me to have certain accommodations, and us having that conversation about that was really helpful rather than me just, telling them my physical symptoms and them leaving. So I think that's really important. And then, of course, understanding cultures is so, so important. I mean, even understanding the health literacy levels of parents or guardians is really important, but also of the individual patient if they're too old to be accompanied by their parent or guardian.
Right. Understanding, so health literacy, for those, in case you don't know, is basically your ability to comprehend what a health professional is telling you. And some doctors speak in doctor speak, and therefore you really don't know what's going on. Sometimes actually they dumb it down in a way that's like, okay, I need more information than that. That's really not helpful enough. I've even found that to be the case. Maybe, I don't know for how many people that's true, but it's, so if I'm hearing you correctly, it's talking to a patient so that you see them as a whole person and addressing more than just their immediate needs clinically, but like what's going on in their life that may be impacting their health and vice versa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, understanding a patient's goals is really important too. So, I mean, obviously, well, chronic illness for most is just not ever going to really go away from someone's life. And so I think that understanding what the patient wants at that certain time is really important. So for me, for example, I mean, it's really important for me to be physically active, and climbing and hiking is a huge, huge part of my life. And so and right now, I have abnormal respiratory issues, but that's all I really want is to be able to get back to those types of things that I was able to do before I had this, emergence of respiratory issues. So I think just being clear about understanding the patient's goals is really important too.
So sorry, I think I missed something. You have respiratory issues?
Yeah, yeah. So actually, I was on, it's kind of a new thing. So I was on an infusion. Last year at this time, I was able to run 8 miles every other day. And I was kind of at like some of like, I just felt so good last year at this time. I had a 6 out of 6 inflammation level. So good is very relative, but in terms of like athletic, um, I guess ability, I don't know if that's the right word. I was probably at one of the peaks of my entire life. And so I started this infusion to reduce the inflammation, but instead it gave me respiratory issues that I wasn't able to figure out that it was the infusion because it didn't have that it has the potential to cause pulmonary issues. And so I didn't figure that out until I think about October, November, until I started wheezing really bad. I would wake up in the middle of the night. I would have like 3 hours of sleep and go to college, my classes in college, because I was like just up all night, very uncomfortable, respiratory in yeah, with breathing and everything. And so I think that was um, yeah, so that's been kind of new in my life. And so I think and I've been working very closely with my pulmonologist to be able to start retraining again and being able to just even run a mile at this point because I've my my lung function has gone down quite a bit from just a year ago due to this infusion. So
Wow. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. That's not a fun discovery.
yeah, no, I mean, and it's
What did you
interesting
learn this
because
time?
yeah, it took so long to figure out that it was the infusion because that infusion did not contain any information about pulmonary issues. And so that's another thing actually too is that it took a lot to get my doctor to recognize that at Mount Sinai.
Oh,
And so, and what's really interesting to me is that there has been one case report about someone on Entyvio having pulmonary issues, and that was by authors in Germany. Um, but I'm seeing this a little bit more with my peers who are on the same infusion. And I feel as though this is something that needs to be researched and that needs to be published a lot more. And also, just to be clear, that case report in Germany, you had to pay about $60 to get access to that. And so, as a patient, you're searching for information and for reasons why you're having kind of respiratory decline in a way, but you're not able to find information. And then when you find information online, you have to pay $60 to get access to that one piece of information you can find online. And so I just think yeah, it's just really fascinating how there's a lot of barriers for patient self empowerment to find out what's wrong. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of times it is up to the patient to be able to determine what's going on with them because a doctor is not always accessible immediately. And for me, I live such a busy lifestyle. Like this summer, I was in Boston for the first half. I was doing research, and then for the second half, I was in New York City interning. And so I was like moving around a bunch of places, and I'm not the best at keeping track of my health either. So, yeah, which is something I'm still working on, even after about 15, 16 years of living with ulcerative colitis. And in fact, I think it's because I've lived with ulcerative colitis for so long that I'm just like, oh, it's fine, which is something that I'm really trying to work on because that is not the case at all, and I need to be a little bit more on top of things. But once again, it's very hard as a young adult who has so many opportunities and there's so many things going on to have to focus on your health too. So
a balancing act, always going to be a balancing act.
right,
And
right,
if it's not work, it's play, and we are all entitled to play. Um,
yeah,
I always think my little tip is that is try to find ways to play while taking care of yourself, which I
yeah,
guess, well, maybe not with the respiratory issue right now, but um, but hiking is a really good example of that.
right.
Actually,
No, absolutely. I think outdoor recreation is so important, and that's been huge for me. I mean, my parents, my entire life, have been super outdoorsy people. I've been very lucky that they've encouraged just being outside and going on hikes and stuff. And so one of the things that's been, or two things that have been my release throughout college is I am a trail maintenance volunteer at my local state park, and I've been able to help keep one of the trails wheelchair accessible, which has been so much fun because I learned how to use a chainsaw and all these different tools. And it was just so much fun. I know it's really funny to me too that I use a chainsaw, but it's been so much fun just to be, outdoors and to be in a place where there's not like this hyper stress like there is in college a lot of times. But the other thing that's been really important to me has been climbing. And so rock climbing has been certainly one of the biggest releases. And before the pandemic, I would go every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and just have an hour or two in the morning just for myself. And I would not schedule any calls during that time or not do any work except maybe like a little bit of homework in between my climbs. But it was just so nice to have that sort of time. And I think physical activity to any extent, even just walking up the stairs a few times a day, or doing some weights or something just for a little bit is super important, just to keep yourself as move as as much moving I don't know how I just said that, but moving as much as possible, I think is really, really
Yeah,
great.
I couldn't agree more. I'm a really big proponent of what I call intentional movement. Like you can call it exercise if you want, but it just means being in touch with your body and and having it work intentionally. And
Mhm.
now everybody in the world, but definitely with a chronic illness, has a different definition of what that looks like, um,
Absolutely.
and it may take a lot of time. Like people, so I love working out, and actually, I have to work out.
Mhm.
I can't push myself too hard, but if I
Mhm.
don't work out, it's really bad too. And I'm pretty good at finding that middle ground. But I have people asking me all the time, like, "Oh, you have fibromyalgia. How can you do that? I can barely, do X, Y, Z. Like, I can't lift weights." And um, I'm not their trainer, but I say like I would try and find a way, even if it's like really little baby steps, to just find a way to be intentional and work your way up to whatever makes sense for you. Uh, it's also just important for everyone's health, right?
Oh, right. No, absolutely. I mean, doing what you can, and I mean, I'm really proud of anyone who takes that first step with a chronic illness, because it's really hard because you feel like you should be like, the most athletic when you start exercising, or like you should be able to run a marathon and all these things. But it's like for some of us, that's just not a reality that's attainable at this time. And so I think taking that first step and just doing what you can is so important and so admirable. I think truly so.
I've actually recently found the best balance in doing 10-minute workouts, but I do pretty intense 10-minute workouts. Like I'll do things online because it really depends on the day with me. But my joints, like if I do too much for too long, my joints get mad at me. And they're like, okay, you need to stop.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
uh, but I worked out. I started actually recording. I don't know why I haven't been recording for years, but I did 20 days out of 30 last month.
Mm.
And that was more than I usually had. And it was because the majority of them were 10-minute workouts, but they were intense 10-minute workouts.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's really cool also to see how much you progress too. I think it's like, for me at the beginning of high school, I wasn't even able to walk up the stairs by myself. And for me to be able to run 8 miles last year at a relatively good pace was really, really something that I had worked toward for so long. And it took so much effort too. I mean, it wasn't just like I just hopped on the treadmill and was able to run like 2 or 3 miles at a time. Like it was very, a very, very slow progression of me running like half a mile, then a mile, then 2 miles. And, it's been a little frustrating to lose that, I think, over this year, but I think that hopefully I can kind of get back to that normal that I had last year. So
I have no doubt when you, the moment you are able, whether it be for respiratory reasons or the pandemic, I heard that you climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. Your next is Everest. Like this, there's no stopping you. I know.
yeah, no, yeah.
Um, I I can keep talking to you forever. I really like you. Um, uh, I I wanted to know, there's so much you've been working on around patient advocacy. And first of all, thank you. I just want to say one big thank you for taking initiative um,
Mhm.
in our community, and especially for an even smaller subset of our community of people of young adults, where really we just don't get like people with chronic illnesses in general are often overlooked, and
Mhm.
those with young adults, especially having uh, really experienced it intensely at a young age,
Mhm.
or it's, as you said, like a little bit delayed sometimes, like life in general is a bit more delayed.
Mhm.
uh I mean, I don't know if I've ever met anyone who really was supporting people in that age group, or with those particular problems. Like I'm 30 years old now. I just turned 30 like a couple weeks ago. I'm like, ah. and
Yeah.
um and I'm thinking about in my, like, it was the worst for me when I was in my late teens and early 20s. I didn't even get diagnosed until I was 20. Yeah, 20.
Wow.
And like I would have given so much to have had a community at that point.
Mhm.
I really
Right.
didn't know, I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know who to talk to, and especially with fibromyalgia, and I look healthy and all these things. Uh,
Yeah.
I felt very, very lost and judged. It was a hard time. So thank you for being that person for us.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean it's really exciting. This, Health Advocacy Summit has grown so much because there is such a huge need, and there's so many people who are kind of, young adults who are in this liminal state where they don't really know what's next for them, and they don't really know how to navigate a lot of these excuse me, these social pressures. And so I think it's yeah, so I think it's really a critical time, and I think if we can make sure that we're properly providing resources and intervening in this population, then we can have more, young adult patients go out into adulthood and fulfill, maybe their dreams before they got diagnosed, or just be in a place where they feel good and they can even pursue their employment opportunities that work for them, and things like that. So.
Yeah, and you're creating mini advocates.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's part of our intention specifically. So the Crohn's and Colitis Young Adults Network was originally a nonprofit that I had created in high school. Um, but I sort of we kind of merged that with the Health Advocacy Summit because it's really hard to be doing two different organizations at once. So with the Crohn's and Colitis Young Adults Network right now, we are quite literally training the next generation of inflammatory bowel disease advocates. So we have fellows from this is our second year of our international fellowship program. So we have fellows from all across the US, and we have a fellow from the UK and one from India. And they're all young adults with inflammatory bowel diseases, and they produce monthly content for our website. Um, they hear from speakers in the policy space, they hear from speakers in the social media space. And then we also fly them all to a US based IBD conference, which has been canceled. So we're looking for a different one to go to and take them all to. But it's really a way to give them a platform and sort of take that first step if they haven't had the opportunity, and hopefully they can continue pursuing advocacy beyond the fellowship program. But we've gotten so much interest from young adults all across the world in this upcoming application cycle for our fellowship program. And unfortunately, we don't have enough funding to be able to support all of them. But we're really excited to kind of be taking a select few of patient advocates that we really feel can make an impact now, and continue making an impact as they um, kind of go into adulthood too with IBD.
Awesome. I love it. Well, we have to wrap up now, but um, is there any lasting message that you want to put out there, or even something you want to mention that you haven't had the chance to yet?
Yeah, I think that I think one of a very generic piece of advice is to keep doing the things that you love, even, maybe even before you got sick, and the things that make you happy, and even doing them in a modified way, I think is really important for you kind of living up to what you see yourself living up to in a way. So I think it's really important to keep doing the things that you love and not let your chronic illness get in the way. I mean, maybe your chronic illness might modify what life looked like for you, but I don't think that it has to stop you from doing what you wanted to do before you got sick or before you got into a flare up, if you've had a chronic illness for a long time. And the other thing that I found that's been very helpful to for myself, especially with keeping myself is occupied and off thinking about my chronic illnesses as one can very easily do, is having a few things going on at once. So for example, I have Health Advocacy Summit going on. I love to climb and I love to hike, so I'm kind of like dipped into kind of different areas, and I think that's been really helpful. And I think it's really important to have different things that you're passionate about and that you can kind of involve yourself and give your energy to, even if that's just a little bit of energy. It's just nice to have multiple things going on at once too.
Very well said. Well, thank you so much for this. This was a delightful conversation, and I'm really excited to see what else you comes your way and what you put out into the world. And happy early birthday! Congratulations on
Yeah.
graduating.
So,
Exciting time. You make pandemic look really exciting.
well, it's crazy because before I was traveling like sometimes 3 or 4 times a month, and now I'm like not traveling at all, which is not gonna lie, really nice. Because I can rest a lot more, and traveling, especially while I was in college, was extremely hectic because it's like I was, my flight came back at like 6 or 7 a.m. and I was in class by like 10 a.m. and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't do this anymore. And so I would not wish this pandemic ever to happen again. I mean, it's been terrible for everyone, and I think specifically a lot for me as well. But it's just been given me a lot more of a time to like relax and get other things in order, specifically my health that I'd been neglecting for so long.
There you
So
go. You got that break that you needed.
exactly. And I've gotten all the medical tests that I quite frankly should have gotten like a few months ago. I've been getting those done, which has been very great for myself. So
Well, I know that you're one to take advantage of an opportunity. So this is a different kind of opportunity.
yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much too.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the HumanCare podcast, part of the Invisible Not Broken podcast network. If you haven't already, please take the next 30 seconds to do these 3 things. Hit our subscribe button, leave feedback with a review, and share this episode with a loved one. Don't forget to check out our official Invisible Not Broken Network Facebook group. Please join us in our community conversations where you can ask questions, connect with fellow invisible illness peers, and make suggestions for the podcast. Visit facebook.com/groups/invisiblenotbroken. And this link will, of course, be in the show notes. Also, if you ever want to submit a question or suggestion directly, feel free to send an email to chronicillnesspodcast@gmail.com. Thank you again for tuning in and being part of our mission to transform healthcare into human care.